There are places in the Imperium where silence itself feels manufactured, pressed into the stone like a residue left behind by centuries of obedience. Deep within these corridors, where lumen strips flicker like dying thoughts, and the air tastes of machine oil and recycled breath, the lives of the forgotten unfold without witness. Here, in the shadowed sanctuaries of the adeptus mechanicus, the churn of gears becomes the heartbeat of those who no longer remember they once had their own. There is no gentleness in these halls and no shame either, only the relentless rhythm of necessity that feeds the empire of a million worlds. And within the endless procession of metal-clad figures, the Servitor stands as the most unforgiving testament to what humanity can become when purpose triumphs over identity. Before we descend further into this world, I ask you if you find meaning in these explorations of the Imperium's unseen lives. If the haunting corners of its lore capture your imagination, lend your support. Like, share, and subscribe, so these chronicles may continue to reach those who search for understanding in the dark. Now, let us return to the machinery of this story, where flesh and steel blur into a single obedient silhouette. The Servitor does not walk with pride nor purpose of its own making. Its movements follow commands, carved so deeply into its mind that even the faintest dream of selfhood would be an error state to be purged. Yet once, long before the chirurgeons and data etchers began their work, each Servitor had a name, a history, a collection of hopes small or grand. Some were criminals sentenced to utility. Some were debts made flesh, sold by those who could no longer afford to keep them. Others were the unfortunate volunteers who never understood the full meaning of service. In a Forge World's catechisms, whatever path brought them here, all ended at the same cold threshold where memory was measured, sifted, and sacrificed. In the manufactorum designated Omicron Theta 9, the air vibrates softly with the drone of cogitators, like a muted choir humming an endless hymn. Along a narrow walkway suspended above the factory floor, a tech priest named Lathriel observes the laborers below with the serene detachment of someone who has replaced most of their endocrine responses with chemical regulators. Red robes brush against augmetic limbs as she adjusts her auspex, her gaze sweeping across rows of servitors fastened into their workstations. Each is connected by spinal plugs to conveyor networks and data hubs, every movement calibrated with absolute precision as they assemble laser gun, components destined for the Astra Militarum. Sparks shower over metal floors, casting brief halos around expressionless faces. In those faces, one might seek the remnants of humanity, but even the faintest trace has been sanded down by repeated cycles of electrotherapy and mind wipe. Lathriel's Vox grill crackles faintly as she records her observations, noting one unit's irregular movement pattern. Designation SVR-99 Hilot 47A. Heavy-set figure with lobotomized calm and the pale, waxen skin of someone who has not seen unfiltered light in decades. Its eyes, clouded and unfocused, flick from task to task as though following an invisible metronome. If one were to stand close enough, they might hear the slight hitch in its respirator intake, a tiny flaw hinting at strain. But strain is not enough to merit concern, not unless it threatens productivity. She marks it for minor reconditioning and moves on. It would be easy to dismiss these beings as little more than tools. Yet tools do not carry the peculiar weight that servitors do. Tools never had anything to lose. What makes these constructs uniquely unsettling is the ghost of humanity that lingers behind their silence. Even stripped of memory, something remains, not sentience, not awareness, but a kind of echo, like the last vibration of a string long after the instrument has been dropped. Some within the Officio Medicae claim this echo is only a neural artifact, a meaningless residue in the wetware. Others whisper that occasionally, in the rarest of units, the echo becomes something more, a flicker behind the empty gaze that should not exist. Consider the tale of the penal legionnaire from the world of Varish Prime, stripped of his identity after repeated charges of insubordination. He had defied countless orders, not out of malice but a refusal to abandon wounded comrades. In the Imperium, virtue can be indistinguishable from treason when it disrupts the war machine's rhythm. When his transformation began, he fought the restraints so violently the technicians had to reinforce the servo clamps. His screams echoed for hours until the anesthetic eventually claimed him. Afterward, when he joined the ranks of assembly servitors, the tech priests noted that his optical lenses seemed unusually moist, as though tears had welled and dried again. No one could explain it. No one wanted to. The echo was not a malfunction, but an inconvenience. something better ignored than examined. At times, even a veteran observer can sense a faint resonance in the way a servitor's head tilts, or how its hands briefly hesitate. It is never long enough to suggest intent, never meaningful enough to disrupt its sacred function, but it is enough to haunt anyone who watches them closely. In the endless machinery of the Imperium, where every person is ranked by utility, the servitor represents the lowest threshold, the point where humanity is kept only because the flesh itself is a useful substrate for augmentation. They have no desire, no fear, no will, and yet the faintest suggestion of memory clings to them like a shadow, cast by a sun long vanished. One could argue that this existence is merciful, compared to the horrors awaiting countless souls across the galaxy. After all, a servitor does not feel pain in the traditional sense. Its nociceptors are severed, its emotional centers burned out. There is no terror in its movements, no anticipation of death, no understanding of suffering. But absence of pain is not the same as peace. Peace requires awareness, a sense of belonging, a belief that one's place in the universe holds meaning. The servitor has none of these. It simply is, suspended in a perpetual limbo between life and utility. As Lathriel continues her inspection, a soft klaxon reverberates through the manufactorum, signaling a shift change. Conveyor belts slow, assembly stations retract, and for the briefest moment the room holds its breath. The servitors freeze mid-motion. Their pose is stiff and unnatural, like statues mid-task. The sudden stillness feels almost reverent, as though the entire factory has become a shrine dedicated to stillness. Then gradually the next cycle begins, and the machines resume their tireless chant. Beyond this manufactorum lies a vast network of conduits and sublevels housing different classes of servitors. Combat servitors, their limbs replaced with chain blades and plasma cutters, stand dormant in recharge alcoves like silent predators dreaming of violence. Medici servitors glide through infirmaries, their tools pristine despite the constant spray of blood. Scrivener servitors tap rhythmically on data slates in long, narrow aisles where parchment scrolls hang like the spines of ancient beasts. And deep in the catacombs where only the adeptus mechanicus tread, skull-faced servo-skulls drift like lost spirits, their hollow sockets casting soft crimson glows onto the stone. SVR-99 Hellat 47 is merely one among millions, indistinguishable except for the way its left augmetic occasionally emits a small tremor. Lathriel notes this anomaly again as she passes and briefly considers flagging it for limb replacement. But resources are finite and replacement is costly. Better to simply recalibrate the nerve interface and allow it to continue working until its flesh degrades beyond repair. Only elite facilities boast the luxury of pristine servitors. Most manufacturers rely on them until their bodies rot beneath their implants. The tragedy of the servitor lies not only in its construction, but in its perpetual utility. It cannot be liberated, it cannot be reclaimed. Whatever person once existed beneath the augmetics is gone beyond recall. The mind wipe ritual is thorough, stripping not only memory but the cognitive structures that allow memory to form. Even if one were to disconnect the neural implants and attempt to rehabilitate the individual, there would be no self to return to. Servitors are not victims awaiting rescue. They are beings irreversibly shaped for their roles in the Imperium's engine, their humanity folded away like an obsolete program. And yet, rumors circulate among the lower-ranked engine seers, whispered during maintenance rites when their superiors are not listening. They speak of rare anomalies where a servitor will murmur a word during downtime, a word that does not belong to its command protocols, a name perhaps, a place, something so small that it feels impossible, a droplet of memory preserved against all odds. The mechanicus officially dismisses these stories as hallucinations or data ghosts. But to those who have spent decades maintaining these creations, the whispers feel too precise to be dismissed. They wonder whether a fragment of the original person remains trapped inside, silent and helpless, like a passenger watching their own body from behind locked glass. Once, a junior engineer recounted how a servitor paused during routine inspection and turned its head as though listening to something beyond human senses. Its optics remained dim, its posture rigid, yet for a single heartbeat the air around it felt heavy, as though the world itself was waiting for it to speak. Then the moment passed. The servitor resumed its task. But the engineer, shaken, insisted that something unseen had brushed the edge of reality in that instant, something older than machinery and deeper than utility. He reported it to his superior, who responded by ordering a memory purge on the engine seer himself, a psychological reset to quell unnecessary imagination. In the mechanicus, curiosity can be more dangerous than heresy. The irony of the servitor's existence is that while it has no concept of suffering, those who observe it often feel the weight of suffering in its place. It becomes a mirror reflecting the Imperium's harsh creed, showing what remains when humanity is stripped of all choice. And yet even this reflection is incomplete, for the servitor does not mourn its fate. It simply endures, an eternal instrument of labor, designed to tolerate conditions no sane human could withstand. Its resilience is a dark miracle, a testament to the lengths the Imperium will go to preserve order. Sometimes in the deeper vaults of certain forge worlds, one can find ancient servitors predating the current era, relics of forgotten wars. They stand motionless in alcoves carved with binary prayers, their joints rusted, their flesh long since mummified beneath cables. Some have been dormant for centuries. Others continue to function in limited capacities, their archaic programming cycling through tasks that no longer serve any purpose. These relics are sometimes honored by the tech priests, not as individuals but as symbols of continuity. They represent an unbroken chain of obedience stretching back to the earliest days of the mechanicum. In those vaults where dust settles like ash and silence feels absolute, one can almost sense a kind of reverence, as though the machines themselves are paying tribute to their ancient kin. But in the manufactorum above, life proceeds without ceremony. The shift continues, machines grow hotter, and the air thickens with the metallic tang of heated alloys. Lathriel crosses the walkways again, her auspex chirping softly as she checks for efficiency drops. She pauses once more beside SVR-99 Helot 47, observing the slight tremor in its augmetic. Her mechadendrites unfurl, sleek as serpents, and begin interfacing with the servitor's neural collar. A brief surge of energy illuminates its spine, causing the servitor's bulky frame to jerk in place. Then the tremor stabilizes. Satisfied, Lathriel retracts her mechadendrites and moves on. During the recalibration, something flickered behind the servitor's clouded eyes, a faint spark, so brief it could easily be dismissed as a reflection from the lumen strips overhead. But if one had watched closely enough, they might have seen the way its lips twitched, forming the first half of a word that no longer existed in its vocabulary. Not a name nor a plea, but something quieter, an echo from the depths where memory once lived. The spark vanished almost instantly, smothered beneath layers of neural conditioning. Yet for that fleeting heartbeat, the machines around it seemed to hush, as though listening again for something that would never come. There are those in the Imperium who look upon servitors with disdain, seeing them as the ultimate expression of punishment or failure. To them, a servitor is a reminder of what happens when one strays from the rigid expectations of society. But there are others, scholars, priests, soldiers, who see something else entirely. They see a warning, a prophecy, a glimpse into a future where the demands of war and survival strip away the last remnants of individuality. For if the Imperium of Man ever collapses, it will not be because of external enemies, but because the machinery of control becomes so absolute that even the living forget how to be alive. The adeptus custodes rarely interact with servitors beyond ceremonial necessity, yet even they acknowledge their role in the vast administrative lattice that supports Terra. On rare occasions, a custodian guard might pass through a chamber where servitors maintain ancient mechanisms whose functions are no longer fully understood. In those moments, the Golden Warriors move with quiet solemnity, stepping around the tireless constructs as though navigating a sacred ritual site. The custodes understand better than most that loyalty and obedience can take many forms, and the servitor, in its mindless perseverance, embodies a purity of purpose unmatched by any mortal. Others, such as the Scitarii, see servitors as kin of a sort. Though the Scitarii remain fully conscious and retain their memories, they too have surrendered much of their humanity for augmentation. When they march past rows of servitors, their metallic footfalls resonate with a kind of camaraderie, an unspoken acknowledgement that all who serve the Omnissiah must bear the weight of transformation. Yet even the most heavily augmented Scitarius retains something the servitor does not: the knowledge of who they were before the surgery, a history that anchors them in the present. Outside the manufactorum, the world continues its tireless motion. Titans stride across barren plains, their shadows stretching like monoliths across the landscape. Orbital docks hum with activity as ships are repaired, refueled, and prepared for war. In the spires where the nobility reside, the air is perfumed with incense rather than machine oil, and the word servitor carries no emotional weight, merely an administrative label. But here, in the austere confines of Omicron Theta 9, the servitor's reality remains unchanged, untouched by the concerns of the outside world. What makes their existence so unforgiving is not pain, nor fear, nor the absence of hope. It is the absolute erasure of identity. They do not know they have lost anything, which in some ways makes the loss even more severe. Imagine a life lived without reference to the self, without the faintest understanding of purpose beyond the immediate command. A servitor does not question, does not reflect, does not dream. It merely operates, sustained by a thin thread of biological maintenance, so that its augmetics may continue to function. And yet in dark corners of the galaxy, stories persist of servitors behaving unexpectedly, a combat servitor shielding a child during a battlefield purge, a mechanicus servitor refusing to administer a fatal dose despite explicit programming, a scrivener servitor writing a phrase that no part of its logic circuits should have been capable of producing. These incidents are rare and often suppressed, but they continue to surface, whispered among those who have witnessed them firsthand. Some interpret these events as divine intervention, perhaps the Emperor's light piercing even the most shattered minds. Others claim such anomalies are simply errors in complex circuitry. But the most unsettling theory is the one spoken only in hushed tones, that the echoes of memory, however faint, never vanish entirely. SVR 99 Helat 47's shift progresses. Hours pass with the relentless precision of a metronome. Its breathing remains steady. Its hands move without pause, and its clouded eyes reflect nothing of the world around it. But deep within the servitor's damaged neural structures, a faint electrical pattern flickers intermittently. It is not a thought, not truly. More like the afterimage of a thought, a chemical residue that refuses to dissipate. Perhaps once long ago this person knew the warmth of sunlight on bare skin. Perhaps they had a family or friends or someone they loved. But these memories are buried beneath layers of surgical scars and machine-etched commands. When the cycle finally ends, Lathril initiates the shutdown sequence. One by one, the servitors cease their movements, stiffening as power drains from their limbs. A planetary governor enjoying the last luxuries of his position before they were stripped away. Caladan's tale is a warning etched into the minds of every who holds office. He presided over a world of moderate importance, a stable agri-settlement that supplied neighboring systems with ration stocks and processed food shipments. The tithe quotas were met. The populace was mostly loyal. There were occasional disturbances in the outlands, but nothing beyond the ordinary chaos of a sprawling imperial territory. Then the Ordo Malleus arrived. The narrative claims that Inquisitor Serevan, garbed in sigils that flickered with wards against the warp, descended upon Caladan's palace with a retinue of silent, masked warriors whose weapons remained idle only out of ceremony. Serevan demanded access to sealed reports concerning a minor psyker incident in a remote district. Caladan, confident in his authority, and assured by his advisors that compliance was unnecessary without formal justification, hesitated, only hesitated. A pause, a breath, an attempt to clarify protocol. It was enough. The next morning, citizens awoke to the sight of the governor's palace gates torn from their mounts. A column of smoke rose where his audience chamber had stood. There were whispers that Serevan invoked his mandate to protect humanity from corruption. The governor was declared compromised, his authority invalid, his loyalty suspect. Some swear they saw him dragged into a shuttle, bound and gagged but still alive. Others insist his remains were found in the rubble, scorched beyond recognition. The administratum quickly erased all records of the event. The world continued its tithe. Not a single soul dared question the Inquisition's decision. Stories continued to drift across the void, borne like drifting embers through the endless night. One speaks of an astra militarum, regiment that sought to conceal a disastrous misdeployment to avoid punishment from their high command. When the Inquisitor, whose identity changes with each retelling, discovered the subterfuge, he gathered the regiment's officers for questioning. The rumor insists that his voice, filtered through a vox grill etched with sigils of judgment, resonated with a cold authority that cut deeper than any blade. What he said is never recounted, because the officers did not survive to repeat it. The regiment was purged not out of malice, but out of the calculated necessity that defines the Inquisition's doctrine. Another tale, whispered among voidfarers who have sailed too close to the veil of the warp, describes an inquisitor whose very presence caused the Geller fields to flicker. They could not say whether this was truth or fear-induced fabrication. Nonetheless, they recount that a crewman, maddened by sleepless nights and the sensation of being watched from within his own skull, lashed out at the inquisitor. The response was instantaneous. The crewman vanished. Some claim he was obliterated by psychic force.